Well, listen. If you don't have anything to say, you blab. You just go on and 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 on.
Voters do not agree with these despicable women on The View. They are wildly out of touch with the vast majority of Americans, and frankly, they should seek immediate help.
She's probably been put in there because, according to Donald Trump, she's a 10. You know that's what it is.
I want to be clear, though. It's not her first job. It was her first press briefing. She worked in the previous Trump administration. I'm going to stop this interview if you continue to attack my colleagues. I would like to talk about Joe Biden and Donald Trump, who you work for.
I am stating facts that your colleagues have stated in the past.
Okay,
now,
I'm sorry, guys. We're going to come back out to the panel. Caroline, thank you very much for your time.
In a statement afterwards, this young lady claimed her, quote, on-air snub proves that you-know-who will not be treated fairly in the upcoming debate. Now, do you think this is going to make people doubt whether CNN can stay objective, or is this more the same of, everybody's against me, it's all rigged, I tell you. Is everything rigged?
No, it's their MO. That's what they do. Rachel Maddow said last week, she's like, if the election is lost, it was rigged. If there's a debate, then the moderators are probably biased and they're prejudiced against me.
Divisive and disgusting speech that any president, certainly in my lifetime, has ever given. He essentially waged war on half of the country by saying that we are all a threat to democracy because we believe in putting America first. It's not radical to want to put your country and your own people first. It's not radical to want to have a strong border, a strong military, and to unleash the might of your own economy, not economies around the world. We have seen cultural Marxism trickling its way through every institution in this country. The public school system, the higher education university system, Hollywood, big tech, the corrupt mainstream media that I fought against in President Trump's White House are indoctrinating my generation of Americans into hating our country, hating one another based on race and gender and all of this other BS.
Karoline Leavitt walked onto the set of The View with a calm confidence that only comes from being completely sure of what was about to happen. She was not rattled by the tension that filled the air as she took her seat across from Whoopi Goldberg and the other hosts of the show. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks. This was her chance to confront Whoopi, a woman who had spent years promoting a progressive agenda on national television, often sacrificing fact-based discussions for the sake of advancing her views. Karoline was determined not to let this opportunity pass without making her voice heard. As the cameras began rolling, the usual buzz of chatter filled the studio. Whoopi's gaze, sharp and intense, locked with Karoline's. The energy in the room shifted, but Karoline remained unfazed. Whoopi, known as the queen of the table, had built a reputation for taking control of conversations. But Karoline was ready for something different today. She wasn't just there to engage in a regular discussion or share some rehearsed response. She had come to make a clear point, and she wasn't going to sugarcoat it. Whoopi began as expected, greeting Karoline with her characteristic dramatic flair. "Karoline, it's great to have you here," she said, setting the tone of the conversation. "But I have to ask you, what's your opinion on the idea that conservative views are out of touch with today's world? Do you think it's time for people to let go of these outdated ideas and move forward?" Karoline didn't hesitate. Her smile remained steady, and she leaned in slightly, her eyes meeting Whoopi's with an intensity that could stop anyone in their tracks. "Well, Whoopi, it's interesting you bring that up," she began, her voice calm but laced with a hint of playfulness. "I've been thinking about it, and maybe it's not the conservative views that are out of touch, but perhaps it's your progressive ideas that are starting to crumble under the weight of common sense." The reaction from the studio audience was immediate. A soft murmur spread through the crowd as the other hosts exchanged looks. Some were curious, others seemed a bit concerned, but everyone was clearly taken aback by Karoline's bold response. For a brief moment, Whoopi's expression faltered. This was not the answer she had anticipated. But Whoopi was no stranger to a challenge. She quickly recovered, scoffing and firing back. "Oh, please. You conservatives are always clutching your pearls about tradition. But let's be real, Karoline. This country needs change. People are ready for it. It's time to move forward, not backward. Karoline's eyes gleamed with mischief as she relaxed in her seat, her posture still sharp and focused. She leaned forward slightly, challenging Whoopi with her response. Forward? Karoline repeated, her voice tinged with sarcasm. To a world where cancel culture runs rampant, where people lose their jobs for simply expressing a different opinion, and where basic common sense is considered controversial? Is that the future you're talking about, Whoopi? The words hung in the air for a moment, the tension in the room building. Karoline paused for effect, then added, Maybe that's the change you're looking for, but I'll stick to something a little more grounded in reality. The silence that followed was palpable. The rest of the panel shifted uncomfortably, in their seats, unsure of how to respond. But Karoline wasn't fazed. She had made her point, and she was standing her ground. She had come to The View to speak her truth, not to appease anyone. What made Karoline's approach so effective wasn't just her ability to challenge Whoopi, but the way she made her argument relatable. She wasn't just parroting talking points or offering vague criticisms. Instead, she was asking tough questions that forced everyone, including Whoopi, to think about the consequences of their beliefs. It wasn't about political labels. It was about the real-world impact of those ideas. Karoline's message was clear. Progressivism, as it was being practiced by people like Whoopi, was starting to lose its grip on reality. Instead of moving forward, the country was descending into a culture of censorship and intolerance. The very things that were supposed to represent progress were actually holding back meaningful discussion and stifling diverse opinions. Karoline wasn't just criticizing progressive ideas, she was challenging the direction the country was heading in. Whoopi, clearly taken aback, tried to recover, but Karoline's words had already made an impact. There was no simple response to what Karoline had just said. It was a direct challenge to the foundation of Whoopi's views. Karoline wasn't just there to discuss a political issue. She was there to push back against the idea that progressivism, in its current form, was the answer to everything. As the conversation continued, it became clear that this wasn't going to be the typical one-sided. The room became quiet for a brief moment. Whoopi blinked, clearly caught off guard by Karoline's words. But, as expected, she quickly regained her composure, attempting to keep control of the situation. Oh, now we're talking about cancel culture. Whoopi scoffed. Please, you conservatives are just upset because you can't say whatever you want without facing consequences. Karoline let out a light chuckle, shaking her head as she prepared to respond. No, Whoopi, what I'm upset about is that people like you are turning basic decency into something political. You want to lecture the rest of us about moving forward, but every time you talk about progress, it sounds more like you want to erase history and rewrite everything to fit your own narrative. A few gasps came from the audience as the tension in the studio grew. Whoopi, visibly shaken, leaned in slightly, her voice rising with emotion. You're out here acting like your traditional values are some—
Well, listen. If you don't have anything to say, you blab. You just go on and 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 on. Right. That's what you hear. Yeah. When they don't have anything to hold you with, nothing to make you think about what they have to say. They talk at you, not to you. And that's what she was doing. And she was doing it, and it's not new.
No.
But everybody's hip to you all now.
Yeah.
And we are anticipating that you are not prepared. Because you keep saying you going and you preparing when you're on the trail.
Live on this program yesterday, Joy Behar stirring the pot of controversy after saying this about Karoline.
She's probably been put in there because, according to Donald Trump, she's a 10. You know that's what it is.
Do you want to take this?
No, you cannot be attractive and smart. I will try to give Joy the benefit, and thank you. I try to give Joy the benefit of the doubt that she didn't see that briefing. Because if you saw that yesterday on numerous topics, no big binder, I think she might have had a different impression of this young woman who held her own.
You would have to give her the benefit of the doubt that she did absolutely no research or reading about anything dealing with Karoline Leavitt before she made that remark. Because Karoline Leavitt worked, she went to St. Anselm College, she worked for WMUR. She lost by 8 or 9 points, but she still put on a good campaign. Then she was the press secretary for the Trump campaign, going on TV literally every day.
Well, heavily pregnant and a new mom.
Pregnant. Yeah, she's a new mother. And then she goes out yesterday and gives and this, again, this is speaking very objectively, because I've watched every press secretary since going back to Marlon Fitzwater. Yeah, I'm that old. And she went out there for her very first briefing at the age of 27 years old, the youngest press secretary ever, and did a terrific job.
I would like this young lady this is her first job, I would like her to do a little homework, because she said something yesterday that really pissed me off. And that was, she said, there will be no wokeness here.
Oh, yeah.
Let me explain something to you, because without that wokeness, you might not have that job.
Yeah.
Because women were not invited to that table. Women were not invited to many tables in this nation. The reason we fought and busted our behinds to make sure that you didn't have to worry about this. And now to hear you talk about it and to hear anybody talk about the wokeness was put in place for a reason, because Black people couldn't get into colleges, because women could not get into the colleges they wanted to go to. This is all women.
Yeah.
See, this is not Black, Asian, this is all women. Women were not invited to this party. It was a man's world, and we busted our
kind of moral high ground, but all I hear is fear. Fear of change. Fear of progress. Karoline grinned, this time leaning forward a little more, her tone playful but still sharp. Fear of progress, Whoopi. I don't fear progress. What I fear is a world where everything we've built in this country, things like free speech, personal responsibility, and the ability to disagree without losing your job, gets thrown out the window for some idealized version of a utopia that doesn't even exist. She paused, allowing her words to hang in the air, challenging Whoopi to respond. The other hosts remained frozen, unsure of how to react. But Karoline wasn't finished yet. She glanced around the table, her eyes glinting with a mix of humor and seriousness. You see, the problem with your version of progress, she continued, is that it's based on a fairy tale. A fairy tale where everyone gets to live in a world free from hard truths, where no one's feelings ever get hurt, and where everyone agrees with one another. But here's the truth. The real world doesn't work that way. You can't just wish away disagreements. You can't force everyone to think the same. And guess what? That's not oppression. That's called living in a democracy. Whoopi opened her mouth to respond, but Karoline raised her hand, signaling that she wasn't done speaking yet. Karoline knew she had struck a nerve, and now she was determined to make her point clear. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, knowing that she would be stepping into a conversation filled with strong opinions. But she also knew that if she didn't speak up, the narrative would never change. This wasn't just about her own beliefs. It was about speaking up for the millions of people who felt like their voices were being silenced, who were tired of having their values dismissed or ridiculed. Whoopi, Karoline continued, the thing is, I don't have a problem with progress when it's based on real, meaningful change. I'm all for growth, for improving things that need fixing. But what you're pushing for is a version of progress that comes at a cost to basic freedoms and personal responsibility. A world where you can't even express a differing opinion without facing consequences. A world where we're more focused on making sure no one's feelings are hurt than on having honest, open debates. The studio was still, the audience on edge, waiting to see how Whoopi would respond. Karoline's voice softened a little, but the message was still sharp and clear. It's easy to call something progress when it fits your agenda, but real progress, the kind that moves society forward, doesn't come at the cost of our fundamental rights. It doesn't come from canceling people who disagree with you. It comes from embracing different viewpoints, from respecting others' right to speak and think freely. Karoline knew that she was walking a fine line. On a show like The View, where political opinions were often divided, speaking out with such intensity could easily be seen as too confrontational or aggressive. But she didn't care. She had a point to make, and she was going to make it, no matter how uncomfortable it might be for others. She looked directly at Whoopi, her tone steady. I understand that change can be uncomfortable. It's not easy to challenge the status quo. But when we start silencing each other, when we begin punishing people for simply having a different opinion, we're not moving forward. We're going backward. We're eroding the very things that make this country great: freedom of expression, the right to disagree, and the ability to have respectful debates. Whoopi seemed to be searching for words, her mind racing to find a rebuttal. But Karoline wasn't giving her an opening. She had set the stage, and now it was time for Whoopi to face the reality of what Karoline was saying. Karoline took a deep breath and continued, I'm not here to tell you that your ideas don't matter. They do, but they're not the only ideas that matter.